So we'll start in the Metropolitan Division. We'll start with our favorite bet in the Metro. That's the Washington Capitals. And like I said, across the board, we like them. Whether you want to bet them to win the cup, win the division, go over the total, however you want to invest in this team. Nick and I are both bullish. Nick, you're a Capitals fan. Lay it on the line for the people.
Yeah, so the Capitals, they're a team coming into this season that a lot of people are kind of aging past their prime. But one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that the defensive core actually drove the team last year and was a big part of why they were good, especially in a season where they didn't get much out of Nicholas Backstrom, who's traditionally been one of their superstars. He really didn't contribute much. So they brought in Dylan Strome to help shore that up. Connor Brown's going to help take over for Tom Wilson, who's injured and should be back in December. And I think those two additions are going to work out really well. And there's a lot of areas where I think there's more upside than people realize. Like, I think when we consider that Nicholas Backstrom really wasn't able to give them much last year with his injury, and they really just fought to get by without him. That means that with Dylan Strome in that position, I'm pretty confident he's actually going to be better than Backstrom was last year. So that's an area where we could see a lot of growth. And then with that said, Connor Brown, I think he's going to fit in really well in the top line to start. And then when Tom Wilson comes back, that's just even more depth. So yeah, I think there's a lot of upside at all ends of the ice. And then the obvious area where they should be much better is they brought in Darcy Kempner, the Avalanche's goaltender from the Cup run. And compared to what they saw last year, which was a pretty middling goaltending duo, I think that's obviously going to bring a big strength to the team.
The Capitals won the Stanley Cup, 5 years ago now, and then have been bounced in the first round of every playoff since then. And I think that's why this narrative was settled on. Basically, once they lost to the Panthers, okay, this team's window's shut. They're not going to be able to get over the hump again. They're too old. The core's too old. Oshie, Ovechkin, Backstrom's hurt. Wilson's hurt. John Carlson, he's on the wrong side of 30 now too. But what people didn't realize is that there is room for this team to improve in the offseason, and they did it. And it wasn't by bringing in Johnny Gaudreau or Nazem Kadri. It was by just kind of restocking that middle six, and they did that. The Capitals are out there 40-1 to win the Stanley Cup. I think that's, of all the bets of all 32 teams on the board, if I was to play one Stanley Cup future, I think it would be Washington at 40-1. Nick, you think that they have a decent chance to win the division? They're the fifth favorite, which is, I'm an Islanders fan. I don't think the Capitals should be longer than the Islanders to win the Metro. I actually think the fact that the Penguins are so much shorter than them. I mean, you look at around the market, and the Penguins are getting their over under set at 101.5 around the market, and the Capitals sitting 94.5, 95.5. The Penguins Capitals, to me, I think it's a coin flip. I actually think the Capitals are a better team.
Yeah, for sure. And you touched on it to an extent. So I think Carolina, they're still going to be quite good, but I don't see how they're this big of a favorite to take the division. And then same thing as you said with the Penguins, I think they're arguably a little overrated. I think the Rangers, they're quite solid. I think they're going to be pretty good again. But yeah, to me, it seems they're way closer to, you can argue they're right with any of those teams. So at plus 750, I think they're a pretty strong play to win the division. And one thing we've consistently seen, this team, they always get off to really good starts in the regular season, which can be a big part of obviously locking down a playoff spot and hanging around in that division race. And then, yeah, another area of upside, TJ Oshie, he's been so consistent for them, and he fought through a lot last year. And that's definitely probably the worst season he's had in a Capitals jersey. So even though he is getting older, I think it's pretty realistic to think they get more out of him. So yeah, there's just a ton of areas where I think the Capitals hold a lot of upside.
Yeah, the most important thing is that everyone else seems to be out on the Capitals. That's when you as a bettor kind of get the signal of, all right, let me jump back in. Don't forget, this team has won or came in second in its respective division in 14 of the last 16 seasons. The fact that everyone's jumping off the ship is a little surprising to me. All right, let's now go to another future we like. This one is kind of the opposite. We both like to bet against the Philadelphia Flyers in terms of season-long futures. They're 12-1 to finish with the worst record in the NHL at FanDuel. I think that's a great bet.
Yeah, that's a tremendous bet. I think there's not a lot that can go super well with this roster. I think we've already got Sean Couturier entering the season late. He's their top center and a very important piece. And it's hard to see how they're going to match up with some of these top teams in the East very well without him. The defensive core is looking pretty rough. I think it's pretty well known, but there's a lot of guys that could struggle. Even Tony DeAngelo, I think he's going to look a lot worse playing for Philly than he did with Carolina last year, which could be another big concern if he's not going to bring it. And then Rasmus Ristolainen, he's still going to play big minutes, and he's just going to continue to get exposed. So even though the torts factor is going to bring, some people thinking that they're going to hang around and maybe at the start, maybe they will. I just think the talent level is too far below the other teams in the East, and they're really going to struggle.
Yeah, in a weird way, the Flyers kind of created their perception in the market themselves. At the end of the year, they were like, we're not going to rebuild. We're going to try to compete again. Around the trade deadline last spring, they were, extending Rasmus Ristolainen rather than trying to trade him. And they kind of set this bar high, and then they hire Tortorella, who is known as a coach who will get the most out of his team no matter the talent level. But that only goes so far. And like we talked about already with the Capitals, like the teams that Philadelphia will just be competing with in the Metro division, it's 6 deep. And then you look at the rest of the conference and the Atlantic division, you can make an argument it's 6 deep. And that schedule will just tear this team apart. And the downside to having Tortorella is when a team quits on him, he doesn't really hold back. The team kind of doesn't hold back, and things could go south really quickly. So if there's going to be an off-ice circus this season, it will probably be in Philadelphia. So you're getting them 12-1 to finish with the worst record, win the wooden spoon, as it's called overseas. I think that's a great bet with Philadelphia. But if you're going to bet this team, like the under's fine. They finished with 61 points last year. You're seeing over unders at 73.5. They're not 13 points better. Like maybe the coaching change does win them 6 extra points, but that's even asking a lot. So I think any which way you can fade these guys on the season-long market is fine. We touched on the Carolina Hurricanes. Let's go there next. They're the favorites to win the Metro at 2-1 at FanDuel. Carolina is overvalued, but good. I think that's the best way to put them. Like they're going to, in all likelihood, make the playoffs going away. I think that it's fair to make them the favorites in the division, but there are some question marks here. And one of them is with the goaltending. Like Freddie Anderson, career year last year, then he got hurt. Antti Ranta, his backup, his deputy, he's not known for being able to stay healthy for a season either. And as deep as this team is up front and even on the back end, like if those two guys aren't up to snuff in a division like this, it's an issue. And their biggest problem last year was, yes, they generate so much volume and they spend so much time forechecking and on the cycle in the offensive zone, but they just have trouble burying their chances. So what did they do in the offseason? They traded for Max Pacioretty. Great fit for them. Great fit for them. Pure goal scorer, the type of guy who does finish his chances, and then he tears his ACL. So it's basically the same forward group, and with the defense group, you swap DeAngelo for Brent Burns, who I think both of those guys are defensive liabilities with high upside offensively. And you can ask yourself, did we see their ceiling last year? And I think the answer is yes. If this team was 20-1, maybe I'd be interested, but at 10-1 and Price is one of the favorites to win the Stanley Cup, I'm going to be passing on Carolina here and a team that I would look all season long to be fading game to game if this is how they're going to be priced.
Yeah, I think you summarized it perfectly. I think they're likely to be quite a strong team, but a little overvalued in the market with some question marks and what is still a pretty strong East and Metro division. So yeah, for me, not a lot of plays here.
The bookmakers of FanDuel kind of view the Metro as a three horse race at the top. Pittsburgh's the second favorite at plus 280. Another team I think is way overvalued here. Maybe way overvalued is a little strong, but this is another team that, did they get better in the offseason? I don't know if they did. They swap out a very steady defenseman in John Marino. Like, he's not flashy. He's not going to be a guy who's going to be the engine of a blue line. But they swap him out for Ty Smith, who's got maybe more offensive upside and could kind of be the number 2 offensive defenseman on this blue line behind Chris Letang. But he was really bad last year for the Devils after a really strong rookie season. So he's an unknown. Then they bring in Jeff Petrie, who's 34, 35, just making an older team older. 5 players, I think, on the blue line are over 30. Then you got the core of Malkin, Crosby, and even Getzel, like getting up there in age. they're great players, but this team didn't get better. They were 25-1 to win the Stanley Cup entering last season. Their over under was around 97, 98 and a half. I was against them last summer, and at bigger numbers, I'm going to be against them again. I think the Penguins are a sneaky bet to miss the playoffs around 3-1 and it's not just about the team makeup, right? Like Crosby, Malkin, Letang, how likely is it that these three are going to stay healthy for a full season? And I know that we saw them not do that last year. Mike Sullivan, he's a great, great coach, still got them to have a stupendous regular season performance. But when you look around the division, like if they fall back, we're not going to see what we did last year, where the 4 playoff teams are basically set in Thanksgiving. Like there's going to be a competition for those 3rd and 4th spots in the Metro. So any kind of blip that the Penguins have, they'll have teams nipping at their heels. So I think I'm out on the Penguins once again. That didn't work out for me last year. Sidney Crosby, maybe he owns me, so maybe it won't work out again this year. But those are my thoughts on Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think you summarized it all pretty well. I think they're just a little overvalued there. Their top stars have kind of consistently had injury problems, whether you want to say that's bad luck or whatever. For me, they've been consistent enough that I don't want to get involved with a team priced in a competitive division that I think is pretty much just rolling back the same core, hoping that it holds up and that those guys don't get any meaningful injuries.
And Tristan Jarry and Casey DeSmith, they're back as the goaltending tandem. Jarry was good last year overall. Great first half, bad second half, and then he got hurt. The season before that, he was bad, and he was bad in the playoffs. And we know with goaltending, it's just so hard it's not linear, right? Just because he was good last year doesn't mean he's going to be good again this year. And of like all the kind of goalies who people just assume are, a top 12 netminder, top 15 netminder in the league, he's one of the ones I would say has the lowest floor and the most potential to maybe sink a team, because he really struggled the season prior to this. He's still young. And then DeSmith as a goalie, I think we kind of know him as your run-of-the-mill NHL backup. Like he can have strong spurts. He'll have bad stretches as well. So the goaltending too is a question mark. So I think there's just enough cracks in the armor here for a team that's being priced as one of the Stanley Cup favorites. When you look at a team that's under 20-1, 101 and a half season point total, that's a little rich. Then the 3rd favorite in the division, the New York Rangers, plus 350. They'll be a little polarizing because there's arguments you can make that everything went right for the Rangers last year. They didn't really deal with any huge injury issues. There was no injury cluster. There was no COVID issues. They were outplayed by the Penguins in round 1 of the playoffs, but they got to play 6 of the games against their 3rd string goalie. Then they played Antti Raanta as the backup in round 2. And then they were good in that Hurricane series. But that was kind of the theme for the whole season with the Rangers, is they weren't playing. The process wasn't perfect. And the goaltending that they got, the generational season they got from Igor Shesterkin, kind of really papered over a lot of their 5-on-5 flaws. They were in the red in terms of like expected goals, season-long metrics. They did get better, but that was a lot to do with as the season went on, they got better, but that was a lot to do with the trade deadline acquisitions they made. Both of those guys, Andrew Kopp and Tyler Mott, are gone. They replaced Ryan Strom's gone. They replaced him with Vincent Trocheck. So this team kind of moves laterally, and there's definitely an argument to be made that we saw their ceiling last year, because like I said, they got a .938 save percentage from Igor Shesterkin over the season. They got career years out of basically every top guy, and they were able to run to the conference finals with it. If a couple more things go wrong, that team could be out in round 1, and the tone around them changes a little bit. But then you can also make the argument that we could see breakout seasons from Lafreniere, from Kakko. Keandre Miller looks like he's on the up and up as a defenseman. So you could make an argument that the Rangers are, worth a sprinkle in the futures market as well. So all that is to say, I think it's pretty fairly priced here, and I'll be sitting them out.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're pretty fairly priced. I like some of the areas. I love Keandre Miller. He's one of my favorite guys to watch. I think he's going to be an absolute stud this year. The top guys up front, if some of them get hurt, there might not be, too many guys to step in and really carry the load. I think Lafreniere is going to take steps forward this year and be strong. But yeah, if they see, some more injuries than they saw last year, the guys like Zibanejad, Panarin, and so on. And then Chris Kreider probably doesn't score 50 goals. So I think there's some areas where they could step back, but overall, pretty likely to be quite strong. Especially one area we've kind of commented on together is how many goalies do we know that are going to be a rock this season? It's probably only a count above around five that we know for sure superstars. And I think you have to consider Shesterkin one of them. So that's a pretty big pro for them this year, and should keep their floor pretty high.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Shesterkin is the clear favorite to win the Vezina. He's shorter than 3-1, which if you want to hear us talk about NHL award betting and give out some of our favorite futures for the season, you can listen to those episodes on Line Change, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. Let's wrap up the division with these three teams: the Islanders, Devils, and Blue Jackets. Last year, we saw Carolina, New York Rangers, Penguins, and Capitals get into the playoffs as the top four teams in the division. If one of those teams were to drop out, I think the Islanders and Devils will probably be the two that are competing for that spot. I think the Islanders have some upside from a betting perspective, which this team, I'd said the Rangers are pretty polarizing. I think the Islanders are probably the most polarizing team in the market because of everything that went wrong. Whereas nothing went wrong for the Rangers last year, basically everything went wrong for the Islanders. 2 COVID outbreaks, injury to number one defenseman Ryan Pulock right away. He was out for 6 weeks, almost missed half the season. They started the season with a weird schedule because they had to start on the road for a month and a half. And by the time that the league shut down for COVID, they had played fewer games than everyone already. They had to make up all those games in the spring. They played this crazy condensed schedule. They looked better in the spring as well while playing that tough schedule, but they weren't good. Like, they also weren't good last year. So the Islanders have enough going for them where you can find them as high as 55-1 to win the Stanley Cup. I would say if you do believe in the Islanders, you should just go big, because the payoff is betting them to go over their point total, betting them to win the division. Like, they're probably not going to win the division. If they go over their point total, that means they're good. Like, what we saw last year was an outlier, and they've already showed us that if they get into the playoffs, this is a really tough team to bounce out. So that would be my piece of advice. I think 55-1 is a good number, good enough if you can find it out there, because we know what the ceiling is, and we know the goaltending is strong enough that they should at least rack up points that way.
Yeah, it's a weird team for me too, and I totally see your line of thinking, because I actually think to miss playoffs can be had at plus 110. I think that's a reasonable play, but I also completely see what you're saying with where the upside is and if they can get back to where they were. And there are teams that to start the season, I'm really going to want to be watching on a game by game basis, odds wise. I think if we can see that Lambert's kind of got them playing a certain way and the way they should look, I think they're a team that actually could be undervalued game by game to start the season. And that'll be a storyline I'm watching. But yeah, I think you touched on it perfectly there.
Yeah, the goaltending for the Rangers was absolutely spectacular with Shesterkin. The Islanders, because Shesterkin got so much love and won the Vezina going away, people didn't realize just how good Sorokin was until the season preview part of the calendar started. And everyone's like, wow, he finished second in save percentage, third in goals saved above expected. And he's got a great backup in Semyon Varlamov. So that right there provides enough of a foundation where the upside should be good enough to keep them in the mix. And like I said, if they get in, you're going to be wanting to hold a 55-1 on the Islanders at that point, because they'll be a tough out. But like you said, I think that's it. Like, it's a weird situation where you either want to go fully against them or just go or shoot for the stars with the Islanders, because they'll probably end up in the middle, which is once again kind of weird to say about this, but if they do end up above average and get into the playoffs, the upside is there on this team. The Devils, they're 20-1 to win the division. I think everyone around the hockey world is kind of waiting for them to take the next step. And when a team has that reputation, they tend to be overvalued, especially when they have the off seasons that they've had the past 2 seasons, bringing in Dougie Hamilton, then Andre Palat, bringing in John Marino in that trade I mentioned before. And they got your boy Vitek Vanacek to tandem with Mackenzie Blackwood. And right there's the problem for me. Like, Blackwood was his trajectory. He's a perfect microcosm for goaltending, whereas his trajectory, people were putting him on the short list to be a Team Canada goalie if the Olympics were held last summer. And then he was bad and then got hurt, had issues with vaccination status. So we just have no idea about Mackenzie Blackwood. And then we have Vanacek, who we kind of have a good idea of where he's going to play, right? He's going to be around 907, 908 save percentage. He'll provide you stable enough goaltending, but he won't rarely win games on his own. So that is enough for me to just sit back and think that the market hype is too much on the Devils. But like the Islanders in a way, if you are gonna bet them, I would, I could see going big on them as well, just because like if things do finally click, like the talent is there, the upside is there.
Yeah, the Devils are a team that I think I'd probably be the least confident in saying like a group of points that I think they could finish in. I really don't know exactly where they're going to end up. If they were somewhere near the bottom, that wouldn't shock me. But if they really took step forwards, I think that's reasonable too. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of stand on this team. It's a little hard to predict how things are going to work out with this team for sure.
Yeah, the Devils finished last season with 63 points, and a lot went wrong for them too. Their 5-on-5 numbers were much better than their actual output was, but 63 points, their over-under sitting around 91.5. You're expecting almost a 30-point improvement. That's a lot to ask. So like, that's what I was saying. If you're going to bet them to go over, just bet them. I would find a bigger price that on the division, on the Stanley Cup, something like that, conference, because you're already asking them to do a lot.
Yeah, and one area I think there's a decent chance things work out okay there. But now they are entering this season with some actual expectations where I think the ownership and the fans, if they come out and struggle, it's going to be a problem. So I think one area worth getting involved that I've seen to keep your eye out on, Lindy Ruff is around plus 900 to be the first coach fired this season. And I think that's a realistic narrative where if they come out and struggle, I think he could be out pretty quick.
Yeah, they did something over the offseason. It was a little weird by Andrew Brunette, who wasn't re-signed by the Panthers after taking over as the interim coach for Joel Quenneville, and then guiding the Panthers to the President's Trophy. Was a Jack Adams nominee. The Panthers moved on for Brunette. He comes to New Jersey, so it's already like they have the guy waiting, looking over Ruff's shoulder. So that is a weird situation. Nico Hischier was injured during training camp. We don't know how long he's going to be out, but he's had trouble staying healthy, so that's not a good sign. And their strength is Jack Hughes is the number one center. He also has struggled to stay healthy at times. And then Hischier is the number two. You have a great 1-2 punch right at the top of the lineup. Guys complement each other really well because Hischier is very good as a two-way center, and Hughes is a great playmaker. And the supporting cast, I think, is strong up front. But like you said, you can throw any number at me and I'd say, yeah, it makes sense for the Devils. So that's the bet into that volatility, I would say, and either go big or go like really low on this team. The other team to talk about here, this is they're a much bigger long shot than the Islanders and Devils, but people are expecting maybe a minor step forward from the Blue Jackets based on what they did in the offseason. Stole the headlines by signing Johnny Gaudreau. They're 50-1 to win the Metro Division. They're a long shot to do anything of note, like win the conference or Stanley Cup. I think similar to the Devils, we're talking about a goaltending tandem where you just don't really know what to expect out of either one of these guys with Merzlikins and Korpisalo. I think a lot of people who are in the weeds with goalie stats think Korpisalo is overrated by the media. I think then people in the media think that he's underrated by people who get in the weeds with goalie stats. And then Merzlikins, like he can steal a game, but he can also struggle as well. Like he's a very volatile goalie. The Gaudreau addition came at a cost of Oliver Bjorkstrand, who had to be traded for nothing to Seattle. So as much of an improvement as he brings to a top six, like they also deleted a 28 goal scorer from last year, but him and Patrick Laine should be great, but who's playing in between them? Boone Jenner as a number one center or Cole Sillinger in his second season? That's probably asking too much. The Blue Jackets are a team that I think I expected to see more hype around because of the Gaudreau signing, and it wasn't there. So I didn't really have a chance to fade them. I was hoping I was going to be able to, but they look like an over team to me right away, like a team that I'll be betting, not season totals, but like game by game, because it just, I don't see where the 2-1 games are coming for this team.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that has actually been fairly widely known is that Columbus overshot the amount of games they should have won last year. I think if you watched them consistently, they had a stretch in the middle of the year where it was pretty ugly and they were just winning some close games they didn't deserve. I think there was a pretty big stretch there where I was trying to fade them. So it seems like that's actually pretty well known, because with Johnny coming in, I'm still seeing a lot of takes that they're going to go under. And yeah, you touched on it. Bjorkstrand is such a great player. I love him. Like, I think his overall impact on the game could arguably be better than Patrick Laine's, which seems crazy to think, but Laine is just a pure peripheral shooter, whereas Bjorkstrand really drives the play. So yeah, I think they're going to be probably a team that I'll be looking to fade, honestly, even with some of the young guns. And to circle back, so I've always been very favorable on this Blue Jackets roster. I think for years they were a little underrated. And some of the Torts years, people said that he was squeezing a lot out of them, but I actually liked what they had there. But this is the first time in a while that I think I'm actually entering the season thinking this team could be worse than a lot of people expect. And I actually didn't love their off-season moves overall. Obviously, getting Gaudreau is a massive win for Columbus in a place where big free agents don't love to sign. But I think behind that, they committed a lot of dollars to some weaker D-men. And for me, it's just not trying to pick on a team that I've always loved. And I love Cole Sillinger and Kent Johnson. But yeah, I think they're a team that I'll be probably looking to fade quite a bit to start the season.